Thank you very much, acknowledging the traditional owners, distinguished guests, and most importantly, the Raine study participants. We've talked earlier about our myopia work. I'm going to focus on glaucoma. Glaucoma is the second leading cause of blindness. It's often not noticed in its early stage, and most large studies find 50% of people are not diagnosed. 10% of people who have glaucoma actually have lost so much vision that they can't safely hold a driver's licence. And it's highly heritable. It runs in families, and we've now found a lot of genetic associations for the disorder. But the blindness from glaucoma can be prevented if we lower the pressure in the eyes, which can be done with drops, laser, or surgery. Now, to describe what it's like being affected by glaucoma, I have some illustrations here. And this is a site where you would need to have good vision if you're driving a car, if children were about to run onto the road after a ball. But if we look at what a lot of people get told about glaucoma is losing your peripheral vision and people can't see this area, and if you do a visual field test, that's what it looks like. But our brain actually doesn't show a black thing, it fills it in. And you can actually demonstrate this personally. If you close one eye and are just looking with one eye, we all have a blind spot, but no one really notices that unless you put something into it and notice that it disappears. So this is what your brain actually does if you have glaucoma visual field loss. You don't notice that you're not seeing something that's in the view. And this is why it's so important to prevent. Now, there are some forms of very early onset childhood glaucoma. They only affect about 1 in 30,000 children. So, it's the odd child per year in Western Australia. 95% of glaucoma usually starts at around age 40, and this is where the Raine study Gen 2 are heading towards. And it's about 1 in 30 adults over the age of 40 is affected by glaucoma. So we're going to expect dozens of people in the Raine study to get this condition. I initially did my work with the glaucoma inheritance study in Tasmania. We saw 2,000 people there who had glaucoma. We tracked all their families and ended up seeing another 3,000 relatives. And you can see from the graph here, after we'd done this major study, the families were made aware that it was running in the families, and the amount of glaucoma testing per population in Tasmania has steadily risen since we did the main bulk of that study. Now, about 5% of people with glaucoma actually have one very specific genetic cause of this, known as myocilin. You can see one of the families here that we studied, where a lot of people are affected by the disorder. And this is the advantage of knowing someone has this genetic risk. This was one of the study participants when we examined him back in 1996, had no symptoms, his eyes were fine. But we actually discovered he carried the major genetic mutation, and over subsequent visits, you can see here the black shadow increasing as his glaucoma progressed. Now, one of the problems, he was a farmer from a remote rural area, and very reluctant to come in. We really had to pester him knowing he was at risk, and he didn't come back and he didn't use his treatment. But we actually used his children, who were also at risk, to bring Dad back when they came back for their check, and he's fortunately been stable since. Now, what I've described here for a common type of genetic disease, what we learn at school and at university, is that it's usually you get the gene, or the gene mutation, you get the disorder. It's a bit like getting a gold dollar coin, you get to enter the glaucoma club. But in reality, what we're discovering for most diseases is that it isn't a single gold coin. It's actually lots of small change that adds up to give us the $1 risk of getting the disease. And this is the work that we have been doing with the Raine study as part of some very large international consortia. And we saw 1,340 individuals. We had their genetic and pressure data, and this contributed to a huge consortium. The International Glaucoma Genetics Consortium has over 20,000 individuals at this stage, and then we used things like the UK Biobank, which is about 500,000 people in that study, and some other very large studies around the world, and a huge list of genes involved here. We also looked at the optic nerve and found, again, a lot of genes are associated with the structure of the optic nerve, which is where the eye is damaged in glaucoma. And now very large studies have come up where we've now got hundreds of genes that are contributing to glaucoma. All of these add a little bit, and I'd like to say it's a bit like an orchestra where you need all the players working in harmony to give you a good functioning eye, but if few of them go off key, you may have some big problems, and occasionally you find someone who's the first violin or the conductor, and they're the ones we really need to pay attention to. But with all this genetic data, we've been able to create what we call a polygenic risk score. So this is a way of looking at all the coins and adding up the small change of value and being able to tell someone they're at much higher risk of getting glaucoma. And this was some work Jamie Craig published from the International Glaucoma Genetics Consortium and UK Biobank, showing that we could more accurately predict those older individuals who are going to get glaucoma. So an interesting finding using this polygenic risk score, and we haven't actually published this yet, is although I've said most glaucoma starts around the age of 40, is there any evidence younger than this that there's any difference? And looking at the Raine study at the age 20 examination, our first major eye exam, we actually see there is a difference showing up even at this young age. It's very small, it's just 1 millimetre of mercury pressure difference between the people with the highest genetic risk and the people with the lowest genetic risk. But this means we probably do need to alert people and make them aware of this. What about looking at the nerve at the back of the eye? And here we've got both the Raine and the Busselton studies, thousands of examinations, and this scan's looking as a map of the thickness of the nerve around the back of the eye, the optic nerve. And you can see the areas highlighted in yellow is where the people with a high genetic risk had a difference compared with the people with a low genetic risk. So the older cohort is showing much more damage is happening there. But then when we also look at the Raine study, the nerve changes in everyone as we get older. We lose individual nerve fibres and this thinning happens, and establishing what normal change is critically important for us to then be able to say this person's changing more than we'd expect. So here are some examples of people who have high genetic risk scores. Now, there's not actually a unit for this, it's just in the centile range of the whole cohort. But when we look at the graph on the top right, their pressures are in the normal range, but they're in the top half of the normal range. And when we look at the same high genetic risk individuals, their size of their nerve thickness is in the lower half of the normal range. So nothing that we would ever worry about if we saw a person randomly, but enough to show that there is a trend evident at this younger age. Now, there was no one in generation 2 at age 20 and 28 who was diagnosed with glaucoma. There were a few people who were told their pressure was a little bit high or their optic nerves were a bit suspicious. But now we are able to add in this genetic risk factor, and we didn't find anyone who had a combination of high genetic risk and suspicious pressure or disc. But over the coming years, these people, and we expect by the age of 40, 2 people in the Raine study generation 2 will be diagnosed. But as I mentioned earlier, with us looking at families, we want to look at what the risk passing down and up. So if someone in generation 2 is pinged as having a high risk of glaucoma or having glaucoma, we need to be checking their parents as well as their brothers and sisters. But we want to now come down and look at generation 3, because the pressure measurement in young babies has only really been made possible with the device we actually used in the Raine study, which is like flicking a little eyelash onto the front of the eye, and the rebound of that gives us a measurement. But no one's ever done a large population study to say what is the normal measurement to expect in children. And we hope to look at these children 6 monthly as part of a myopia and glaucoma study and see, does the pressure stay consistent or does it change, going up and down all the time? So I'd like to acknowledge all the Raine participants, of course, and the many people who've helped me with the glaucoma study over the years. Thank you.